Welcome back. This is the module 10 of the Cisco Introduction to Networks CCNA 1 lecture series. We will be looking at the basic router configurations today. And just to give you a heads up, this particular module is very practical heavy, lab heavy module. However, in this lecture, I will be going through the lecture part of it, and I will post the labs and lab configurations as well as the demonstrations related to it later on my YouTube channel. The main objective of this module is to implement initial settings on a router and end devices. We will look at how you can configure the initial router settings, like the basic Cisco commands, configure interfaces, the Cisco commands associated with those configuring interfaces, and configure default gateway. Again, the Cisco commands associated with configuring default gateways. Again, I'm going to emphasize this earlier on. I will post a separate videos on all these lab modules associated with this particular lecture module. And this lecture module is very lab heavy. However, in this video, we will be just going over all of those information so that you have the background when it's come to working on those labs. Configure initial router settings. The basic router configuration steps include configuring the device name, securing privilege executive mode, securing executive mode, securing remote telnet and SSH access, encrypting plain text passwords, and providing legal notification on the save configuration. So if you're in a lab and you logged into your Cisco router, either using a console cable or using some other method, you will be greeted with these kind of command screens. And if you want to change the host name, what we're going to do is we're going to go host name and then name the whatever the name you want to call it. So in this case, if you go host name, what's going to happen is this router name going to change to host name. So we can put whatever we like here. And then enable secret password will allow you to secure the privilege executive mode. And the line console 0 will allow to secure the executive mode lines with the password with the associated password. The line VTY will allow you to secure the telnet and SSH access. And service password encryption is a command that can be used to encrypt all your plain text passwords on your Cisco device. And then the banner MOTD will allow you to enter a message that will allow you to input a notification of for the person who is trying to access your device with either a warning message or like an introductory welcome message. The command copy running config startup config will allow you to save all of these changes that you have made previously on this device onto its memory. Because when you are configuring these devices, all of these commands goes into kind of like a random access memory that will get erased if you turn off your router or if you reboot your router. But however, running the copy running config startup config will allow you to copy the running configurations, which are the one that you're just doing up here, into your startup config, which is your non-volatile memory. So that when the router get rebooted or power get lost to the router, all these commands that you have entered is saved. Again, going through these slides, probably not going to make any sense to you right now, but when I go through these lab processes in a lab demonstration, you will exactly understand what I'm talking about. So I'm going to go through this slide a little bit faster today. As I mentioned before, this lecture is a little bit lab heavy. So we'll go to the next slide and see what we what kind of commands that we're gonna introduce to you. So commands for basic router configuration, in this case R1, is shown on the right hand side. So remember, when you boot up a brand new Cisco router, all of the routers in Cisco will be named as router. So in here, what we are doing is we're going to change that host name from router to R1 by using the hostname command and giving the host name of R1. Hence, see, it has changed right here. And by entering enable secret class, what we have done is we have encrypting the password class, and then line console 0, which will give you the line console password configurations, and we will in here they have done it as Cisco as the line console password. And by entering login, that password get registered on the device. And then the line VTY 0 to 14 or 0 to 4, whatever, all the line VTY lines can be secured using passwords command. And then again, by logging in, it's gonna get registered there. And the transport input SSH telnet allow that the SSH and the telnet to be configured on your device. And then service password encryption gonna encrypt all the passwords that you have entered just above here. And finally, by entering the banner MOTD, whatever the text message you entered here will be displayed every single time somebody try to log into this device. In this case, the warning would be basically, warning unauthorized access is prohibited, and the stars and everything will gonna get displayed exactly like this on the console screen with the banner MOTD command. And then finally, when you exit out of the configuration, you can run the copy running config startup config, which will save all the configuration changes you have done above. However, you can actually do this even without exiting the configuration mode. You just have to put do at the front. So you do copy running config startup config. That will also save all these commands above. As we move through this course, I will also show you some shortcuts. And I'll be using those shortcuts when I'm demonstrating some of the labs. Like for example, you don't need to type host name. You can just go HOR1 and that will actually change the host name. So you don't need to say copy running config startup config. You can say copy, then we shorten these things up and then it will actually do exactly the same thing. But I will go through them as we move through this course. Just for now, just know these items, and if you have a lab manual or a lab journal that you'll be using, I would recommend write some of these commands down, because these are the ones I'll be showing you in the lab demonstration video. There's a packet tracer file available to you on your Cisco NetAcad website. If you have access to that, please download it and go through them. And that will give you all of those commands. And again, I will go through them and post a video on my YouTube channel in next few weeks that will be showing the commands that we just went over on previous slides. Configure interfaces. Configuring a router interface includes issuing the following commands. By issuing the command interface, you can give the command interface number that will allow you to access the configuration mode associated with that interface. You can give a description for that interface. For example, if you want to say something like this is internal LAN and this is for internal LAN 1, LAN 2, for example, you can give that description. And this description going to be a text-based description and doesn't have any what I call the routing or switching value to it. Is just a description for humans so that we can figure out which interface you are working on. Then by issuing the command IP address, you can issue the IPv4 address a space with a subnet mask. So for example, 192.168.10.1 and then space, we can go 255.255.255.0. That will give you that. And then IPv6 address would be the IPv. You can give the IPv6 address, but instead of giving the entire subnet mask in here, remember IPv6 addresses have prefix length. So you go IPv6 address here / the prefix length, and that will be that will allow you to give you the ability to enter an IPv6 address to that interface. And by issuing the command no shutdown, what we are doing here is we're going to turn that interface, whatever the interface number up here, from being shut down to turn back on. Hence that now interface will be online as a result of this command. It is a good practice to use the description command to add information to the network connected to the interface. However, it is not needed for routing and switching operations. The no shutdown command activates the interface, as I mentioned before. Without this no shutdown command, this interface will be administratively down because you have not turned the interface on in the console. We will look into this as we move through this course. Again and again, I'm going to mention that I will go through them on a real live lab environment as well. The commands to configure interface G000 on R1 are shown here. So what we're going to do, I'm going to show you in this slide. We're going to look at a example configuration of R1 router using those commands that we just talked about. So we have the R1 router. So you're accessing this router and you are in the terminal and you are in R1 configuration mode, which is basically config T will allow you to access that configuration mode. So if you just log into your R1 router, you're going to go config T and it will get you to the configuration mode. And then interface, and in here gigabit Ethernet 0000. Again, there are shortcuts for this. You can go INT GE0000, for example. That will get you the same place. And in here they have named the description as link to LAN, because G00 is on the left hand side and this is the LAN side, so they decided to name it as link to LAN. But remember, this text, this description has no value, no play in the switching or routing of any packets or any network configurations. This is just for humans like you and I to understand what this particular port is doing. In case you come back a year later and you want to know exactly what this port is doing, and you don't need to look up for a paper manual or anything like that, it will be here because it says link to LAN, right? It's easy to identify. Or if there are multiple network engineers and network technicians are working on this project, and you leave after work and the next person come in, they can simply look at this description to know and right away identify which interface associated with what side and what area. So this is just for humans to read. And then we're going to use the IP address command to give a IPv4 address. In this case, we are giving 192.168.10.1 with the subnet mask associated with that, which is 255.255.255.0. Now, if you give a wrong subnet mask here, the Cisco devices are smart enough to give you an error message. So if you give 192.168.10.1 and then you go 255.244.244.0, something like that, it will give you an error message and it will let you know that it doesn't match most of the time. However, there are certain subnets that the Cisco devices may not be able to detect incorrect subnet masks. So it is always important as a network administrator that you make sure that you enter these values correctly. So again, Cisco devices typically give you an error message if you enter an incorrect subnet mask. But there are certain subnets that will not be detected because of certain overlaps and other things. And that's why you need to make sure that you enter these values correctly. And remember, there's a space between the IP address and the subnet mask. And to give an IPv6 address for this interface, what we're going to do, we're going to go IPv6 address, and we're going to go whatever the IP address you would like to give, in this case 2001 DB 8 ACAD 10 and 1 and /64. That's the length of that, the IPv6. Just like the subnet mask here for IPv4, we're going to give the length. And by issuing the no shutdown command, what's going to happen is it's going to turn this interface from administratively down to administratively up, making it that interface live. And then by exiting, you're going to exit from that interface configuration section. And once you do that, you will see some information messages pops up on your Cisco device, unless you have go in there and turn that feature off. All Cisco devices comes by default, this information messages turn on, and it will give you that information that the gigabit interface is now changed. The state has been changed to up because we have done no shutdown, and the interface is now is ready to go. The state is up and is ready to go. Again, I will go through them on a live lab video on a different video, not in this module video. You can see that basically doing the similar thing for the next interface. In this case is the interface on the right hand side, which is G001. And you run the same commands. You go the interface Ethernet gigabyte 001, and we're going to give you a different description in this case because it's on the right hand side and it is connected to the R2. So we're going to just name it link to R2. Again, you can name whatever you like for this, and you use the same IP commands to issue the IPv4 and IPv6. Again, you can pick whatever the IP addresses you're supposed to pick. And in this example, they actually pick a different subnet compared to the G000, because remember the G00 is 255.255.255.0, and here we have 255.255.255.252, as I mentioned before. So you can, you need to make sure that you give those information correctly, and once you do the no shutdown, just like previously, you'll get some messages from your Cisco router showing that the state of that port 001 has been changed from down to up, and it's ready to go. Verify interface configuration. To verify interface configuration, use the show IP interface brief and show IPv6 interface brief commands. And basically what you do actually, once you exit out of this router, you can exit out all the way to the main screen, and then you can type show IP interface brief. Again, if you are not in this mode, if you are in the previous mode, like in here, the configuration mode, if you put do at the front, like instead of going show IP interface brief, you can go do show IP interface brief, and that will display the configurations you just did. And then show IPv6 interface brief will give you the interfaces that you have configured for IPv6 routing. And again, if you are in the configuration mode, which is this mode, the R1 config mode in this case, you just put the do at the front. So instead of saying show IPv6 interface brief, you're going to go do show IPv6 interface brief, and it will display those information that you're looking for. So this is how you verify that whatever you entered to your device has been properly configured on your Cisco router. And remember, all of these configurations are currently is just a running config, and you just need to make sure that you had to run do copy run start command to save it onto the startup configuration. If you lose power or you power cycle your router at this point without running the do copy run start command, what's going to happen is that you're going to lose all the configurations. Remember that command from our previous slide. So I'm going to show you quickly because that's very important. So do running config startup config can be shortened to do copy run start, or copy run start will also do the same command. It's a shortened form. Without this command, and all the configurations that you just did in here will be lost. So make sure that you do that every single time you change a major thing on your router. Again, I will show you these in my live lab demonstrations. But for now, what you need to understand the commands that we just went through and how they are used. So the show IP interface brief and show IPv6 interface brief displays all interfaces, their IP addresses and their current status. Show IP route and show IPv6 route displays the contents of the IP routing tables stored in the RAM. Show interfaces displays the statistics of all interfaces on the device, only display the IPv4 addressing information if you do show IP interfaces. Show IP interfaces, sorry, in this case show interfaces, and then the show IP interfaces display the IPv4 statistics for all interfaces on a router, while the show IPv6 interfaces displays the IPv6 statistics for all interfaces on a router. So these are the key concepts that you should be familiar with as we move forward in these modules. View status of interfaces with the show IP interface brief and show IPv6 interface brief commands are shown here. So just by typing show IP interface brief, it will give you the information about the IPv4 information, while show IPv6 interface brief will give you the IPv6 information. Again, I will go through these labs in a separate video. Display the contents of the IP routing tables with show IP route and show IPv6 route commands can be seen like this. So if you run show IP route, it will give you the IP routes of IPv4 routes just like this, and show IPv6 routes gonna show information like this. I just want to highlight something really important in this course. We will be mostly focusing on IPv4 because same principle applies to IPv6. It just IPv4 make it less complicated for us to just looking at those numbers and values associated with the IP address and the subnet mask as opposed to using IPv6. So you will realize in this Cisco NetAgAT course, most of the focus will be on IPv4. And if you would like to display the statistics for all interfaces with the show interface command, that would be something similar to this. You run the show interface command associated with a specific interface, and it will give you the statistics related to that particular interface. In this case, they are looking at the gigabit Ethernet 0000. Remember those shortened forms? Instead of using the entire gigabit Ethernet 000, they use the gig 000, and it'll still give you that information because that is a shortened form for that Ethernet 000. Again, I will go through them later in my lab video. For the display IPv4 statistics for router interface with the show IP interface command, and it looks like this. It will have the show IP interface. In this case, we are looking at the G000, and then it will result in showing that statistics for the IPv4 associated with that G000 interface. Again, I will show this on your on my video on the live lab video. The show IPv6 interface show the exact same information except for the IPv6. Again, I'm not going to go through them right now. I'll go through them in the lab lecture. Configure the default gateway. The default gateway is used when host sends a packet to a device on another network. The default gateway address is generally the router interface address attached to the local network of the host. To reach PC3, the PC1 addresses a packet with the IPv4 address of the PC3 but forward the packet to its default gateway. In this case is G000 interface of R1. So if you look at the right hand side diagram, that's what this is referring to. The PC3, which would be this device, needs to be reached by this device, which is PC1. So what the PC1 going to do, it's going to send a packet with the IP address of the PC3, which is going to be this one. That's going to be 192.168.11.10. But however, the packet get forwarded to the default gateway of the R1, which sits between this PC1 and PC3. And the default gateway of this PC1 going to be the G001. Sorry, G000. The default gateway of the PC3 going to be the G001, because the PC3 is connected to the router's G001 interface, while the PC1 is connected to G000. So in order for PC1 to reach PC3, it has to forward that packet to the G000 interface of this router with the IP address associated with the PC3, which is 192.168.11.10. So that's what this is trying to, explain it to you on here by Cisco, this Cisco diagram. So that's what you need to get out of this slide. The IP address of the host and the router interface must be in the same network. So remember that the IP address of the host and the router interface must be in the same network. In other words, this PC1 have the 192.168.10.10 and this is going to be 192.168.10.1. But however, this is different. This is 11.10, right? But that's why it has a different interface on this side of the router, which is going to be 192.168.11.1 here. But here it's 192.168.10.1, which is associated. This PC can be associated with that gateway, default gateway interface. Default gateway on a switch. A switch must have a default gateway address configured to remotely manage the switch from another network. So if you want to manage this S1 switch all the way down here, which is past that router 1, you must have a default gateway address configured so that you can remotely manage that switch. To configure an IPv4 default gateway on a switch, we use the Cisco command IP default gateway. Then we add the IP address in the global configuration command. So if you want to configure that, this particular switch, you need the ability to be able to configure this particular switch remotely. What you need to make sure that we have a IP default gateway, which is right here, this command IP default gateway added, that command added with the gateway IP address on the switch. Otherwise you won't be able to access this switch remotely behind a router. Again, I will show exactly how you can do those things on a live Cisco lab video that I will be posting in the future. But just for now, just remember, these are the things you need to you need to understand in this course and in this module. If you have access to the Cisco NetAcad, you can go ahead and download this lab and start working on it. But again, I will make sure that I'll post that on my YouTube channel in next few weeks. There's another packet tracer file that you can access from your Cisco NetAcad. Again, because this particular module lecture is extremely lab heavy, I will make sure that I'll go through all of these commands and labs on a live video, and I'll post them onto my YouTube channel. But if you do have access to it, please go ahead and download the Troubleshoot Default Gateway Issues lab and work on it, and that will give you a better idea about everything that we just covered in this module. That will bring us to the end of this lecture, and I'm going to go through everything that we have learned in this module in the next few slides. Again, there is a video that describes all of these configurations and go through everything that we just learned on your Cisco NetAcad. You can go ahead and watch that video, and I will try to find that video and post onto my YouTube channel. There is also another basic device configuration lab, the packet tracer lab available on your Cisco NetAcad that will also go through briefly everything we just learned. There's another lab called Build a Switch and a router network available on your Cisco NetAcad modules. If you have access to it, please download it and go ahead and do them. And I will try to get a copy of those labs and post onto my website so that you can download and you can work on it as well. And I will leave a link to those labs in the description of this video so that you can download them and work on them. And I will also post a video, as I mentioned multiple times. And all of these labs will give you a brief summary of everything that we went over. And finally, I will give you an overview of what we just covered. So we covered the tasks that should be completed when configuring initial settings on a Cisco router. We learned how to configure the device name, secure the privilege executive mode, secure the user executive mode, how to secure remote telnet SSH access, secure all passwords in config file, provide legal notification, and how you can save those configurations to your Cisco router or switch. For routers to be reachable, the router interfaces must be configured. Using the no shutdown command, we can activate the by default turn off interfaces. The interface must also be connected to another device such as a switch or a router for the physical layer to be active. So if you issue no shutdown command, the interface may be still down if there is no other device is connected to that interface, even though you have turned the interface on. There are several commands that can be used to verify the interface configurations, which we learn in this module, which are show IP interface brief, show IPv6 interface brief, show IP route, show IPv6 route, show interfaces, show IP interface, and show IPv6 interface. So all of these things we will cover in our lab lecture video, but just know those those commands do exist. We also learn for an end device to reach the other networks, a default gateway must be configured. So if you do not have a default gateway configured on the end device, it cannot reach the other network. It can reach internal LAN within its own network segment, but it cannot reach past a router, for example, to another network if it doesn't have the default gateway. The IP address of the host device and the router interface, therefore, must be in the same network. Remember, I described how if the PC1 is connected to the port 1 of that router, the PC1 and port 1 must have the same subnet mask, and it should be in the same subnet network in order for it to communicate properly. So the IP address of the host device, in this case the PC1 I showed you, and the router interface address must be in the same network. A switch must have a default gateway address configured to remotely manage the switch from another network. So you can have a switch without the default gateway configured. However, you won't be able to manage that switch remotely. You had to do it with a console cable every single time. But if you add the default gateway address to the Cisco switch, you would be able to access that switch remotely and manage it from there. To configure an IPv4 default gateway on a switch, use the IP default gateway command, IP global address address global configuration command. So remember those things. To configure an IPv4 gateway, default gateway on a switch, we use the IP default gateway command with giving the IP address. So you're going to go IP default gateway and then just going to enter the IP address. So for example, IP default gateway 192.168.10.5 and press enter, and that will actually give you the default gateway address for that Cisco switch for global configurations. So basically it will allow you to access your Cisco switch remotely for management and configuration. That is the end of this lecture, and I will be posting the next few modules within the next few days to weeks. And if you have any questions or concerns related to this very lab heavy lecture, which probably you do because I haven't gone through a live lab yet, you're more than welcome to leave a comment below. As I promise, I will make sure that I will post some live lab going through the commands that we went through in this particular modules and post to my YouTube channel, so you have a better idea of how these commands are used in a real world or simulated environment. I'll be using Packet Tracer or even G, either simulation or emulation, to show these commands, demonstrate these commands to you in next few videos. If you have questions related to that, like I mentioned, you're more than welcome to reach out to me either by leaving a comment in this video or by sending me a message. Please make sure to thumbs up this video and subscribe to my channel, so in the future when I post additional modules and more Cisco lectures associated with different classes and class materials, you'll be the first one to get notified. Until next time, good luck with your exams and quizzes, and have a nice day.